It was a chilly December evening in Los Angeles, a time when the city glowed with holiday lights and a faint air of celebration. In the bustling heart of Hollywood, Theo Grayson, a charismatic 32-year-old actor with a string of successful roles, was the face of rising stardom. Handsome, talented, and endlessly charming, Theo had captivated audiences worldwide with his roles in back-to-back blockbusters. But beneath the surface of his picture-perfect life lay a man haunted by secrets. On the night of his disappearance, Theo was last seen leaving an upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills after a dinner meeting with his agent, Sandra Mills. Witnesses described him as upbeat, laughing, and posing for pictures with fans who had gathered outside. Security footage later confirmed Theo getting into his sleek black Porsche 911, giving a casual wave to the cameras as he drove off. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. The next morning, the tabloids screamed his name. Theo Grayson missing. Hollywood's golden boy vanishes without a trace. The entertainment world was in an uproar. Theo's face, those piercing blue eyes and confident smile, was plastered across every screen and magazine cover. Fans speculated wildly, some claiming it was a publicity stunt for an upcoming movie, while others hinted at a more sinister plot. Detective Linda Morgan was assigned to the case. A 20-year veteran of the LAPD, Morgan was no stranger to high-profile investigations. She'd seen it all: murders, scandals, and disappearances, but there was something about Theo's case that gnawed at her. Perhaps it was the eeriness of his last moments caught on tape, or the fact that his car was later found abandoned in a quiet residential neighborhood, the doors locked, and no signs of a struggle. Inside the Porsche, investigators found Theo's phone tucked neatly in the center console. Oddly, the device had been wiped clean. No messages, no call logs, no photos. His wallet was untouched, cash and credit cards intact. It was as though Theo had driven into the night and simply ceased to exist. The more Linda dug into Theo's life, the murkier the picture became. On the surface, he was the quintessential Hollywood heartthrob, wildly successful, universally adored. But beneath that facade, cracks began to appear. Theo was embroiled in a bitter legal battle with his former manager, a man named Rick Calloway. The two had parted ways after allegations of financial mismanagement, with Theo accusing Rick of siphoning millions from his accounts. Linda's team tracked down Rick, who was less than cooperative. Theo had it coming, Rick spat during his interview. He played the victim, but he wasn't the golden boy everyone thought he was. Rick's alibi, however, was airtight. He had been on a red-eye flight to New York the night Theo vanished. As the investigation unfolded, Linda discovered another layer to Theo's life: a secret relationship with a woman named Alina Martinez, a former costume designer who had abruptly left the industry a year prior. Alina refused to speak to the media, but reluctantly agreed to meet with Linda at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. "He wasn't who everyone thought he was," Alina said, her voice trembling. Theo had demons. He was paranoid, always looking over his shoulder. "He told me someone was after him, but he wouldn't say who." Alina revealed that Theo had been receiving threatening messages for months. Cryptic notes slipped under his door, anonymous texts warning him to stay in line. Theo had dismissed them as pranks, but as his paranoia grew, he started withdrawing from those closest to him, including Alina. The investigation took a darker turn when forensic analysis uncovered a partial fingerprint on the wiped phone found in Theo's car. The print belonged to a man named Victor Harris, a shadowy figure with ties to organized crime. Victor had been arrested several times, but had always managed to avoid conviction, thanks to a network of high-powered connections. Linda tracked Victor to an exclusive members-only club in downtown Los Angeles. Their confrontation was tense, Victor smirking as he denied any involvement in Theo's disappearance. "People like him don't just vanish," Victor said with a shrug. Maybe he finally got tired of being a puppet for Hollywood, but Linda wasn't buying it. As she left the club, a nagging feeling told her she was closer to the truth than she realized. The discovery of Victor Harris' fingerprint on Theos' phone threw a dark shadow over the investigation. Detective Linda Morgan knew that Harris was dangerous, and his involvement meant Theos' disappearance wasn't a simple case of a runaway actor. But Harris' smirk and cryptic remarks left her with more questions than answers. What did he mean by Theo being a puppet for Hollywood? And why wasn't he more concerned about being tied to a missing man? The next lead came from an unlikely source, a paparazzi photographer named Jamie Cutter. Known for his knack for finding celebrities at their most vulnerable, Jamie had called the tip line claiming he had explosive information about Theos' last moments. Linda met Jamie at a dingy diner off Sunset Boulevard. He was a wiry man in his late 30s, with a nervous energy that made him seem like he was constantly looking over his shoulder. Over coffee, he slid an envelope across the table. "I didn't come forward earlier because I didn't want to get involved," Jamie said, lowering his voice. "But the night Theo disappeared, I followed him after he left the restaurant." Inside the envelope were a series of grainy photographs. The first few showed Theo driving his Porsche through the city, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. But the last photo sent chills down Linda's spine. It showed Theo parked in an alleyway, talking to a man in a dark hoodie. The man's face was obscured, but something about his stance seemed familiar. "Where was this?" Linda asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Downtown," Jamie replied, "near the old garment district. After that, I lost them." They drove off together. Linda thanked Jamie and took the photos back to the station. Her team immediately set to work analyzing the images, enhancing the grainy details. The man in the hoodie remained unidentifiable, but the alley's graffiti gave them a location, a desolate stretch of road in the heart of the garment district. When Linda and her team arrived at the alley, the air was thick with the stench of decay and motor oil. It was the kind of place no one lingered in unless they had something to hide. As they scoured the area, one of the officers called out, "Detective, over here." Behind a rusted dumpster, they found a small leather-bound notebook. The initials G were embossed on the cover. Inside were pages filled with Theos' handwriting, frantic, disjointed thoughts that hinted at the depths of his paranoia. "They're watching me. I can't trust anyone. Even Sandra might be involved." Linda's heart sank. Sandra Mills, Theos' agent, had been one of the last people to see him alive. She had painted herself as a concerned confidant, but Theos' words suggested otherwise. The notebook also contained a strange list of numbers and initials, like some kind of code. One entry in particular stood out, "Vich, last warning, Victor Harris." Linda knew she was onto something, but the pieces still didn't fit. She returned to the station, where her team had been digging into Theos' background. They uncovered a series of payments from Theos' account to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. The payments totaled over $2 million, all made in the last 6 months. The recipient? A shell corporation tied to none other than Victor Harris. Linda confronted Sandra Mills the next day. The seasoned agent, always composed in front of the cameras, looked rattled as Linda laid out the evidence. "Why didn't you tell us Theo was being extorted?" Linda demanded. Sandra's eyes darted around the room. "I didn't know," she insisted. "Theo kept his private life private. He never told me about any of this." But Linda wasn't convinced. She pressed further, and Sandra finally broke down. "Okay, fine. He told me someone was threatening him, but he didn't say who. He just asked me to set up a meeting with someone who could help. I didn't ask questions." "Who did he meet with?" Linda asked. Sandra hesitated. "Victor Harris." The admission hit like a punch to the gut. Sandra had knowingly set Theo up with one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles. Later that evening, Linda sat in her car outside Victor Harris' mansion, a sprawling estate hidden behind high gates and security cameras. She knew she couldn't bring him in without more evidence, but her gut told her Theos' fate was tied to whatever deal he had made with Harris. As she watched the house, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll end up like him." Linda stared at the screen, her heart racing. The walls were closing in, and she knew she had to tread carefully. But one thing was clear. Whoever was behind Thea's disappearance was watching her every move. The threatening message sent a chill through Linda's veins, but it also steeled her resolve. Someone was trying to intimidate her into abandoning the case, which only confirmed she was getting closer to the truth. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous things became. The next morning, Linda ordered a surveillance team to monitor Victor Harris' mansion while she worked to piece together the financial trail. She focused on the mysterious offshore payments Theo had been making to Harris Shell Corporation. If she could prove Theo was being extorted, it might be enough to obtain a warrant to search Harris' property. Meanwhile, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sandra Mills was still holding back. Thea's agent had admitted to facilitating the meeting with Harris, but claimed ignorance about the nature of their dealings. Linda decided to pay Sandra another visit, this time unannounced. Sandra's home was a sleek, modern glass box perched in the Hollywood Hills. When Linda arrived, she found Sandra sitting on the patio, a glass of wine in hand. "Detective Morgan," Sandra said, her tone weary, "I already told you everything I know." "I don't think you have," Linda replied bluntly, taking a seat across from her. "You knew Theo was in trouble, and you set him up with Harris." "What kind of trouble was he in?" Sandra sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Fine. Theo came to me a few months ago, panicked. He said someone had dirt on him, something that could destroy his career. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but he was desperate to keep it quiet. He begged me to help him, and I thought Victor might be able to make it go away." "What kind of dirt?" Linda pressed. Sandra hesitated, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "There was a woman. I don't know her name, but Theo mentioned something about her being connected to someone powerful. He said she was threatening to go public with accusations." "What kind of accusations?" Sandra's voice dropped to a whisper. "Assault." The revelation hit Linda like a punch to the gut. If Theo had been accused of assault, it explained why he had been so desperate to cover it up. But it also painted a darker picture of the man the world adored. "Who was the woman?" Linda demanded. "I told you, I don't know her name," Sandra said. "But Theo mentioned she worked in the industry. He said she wasn't after money, she wanted revenge." With that, Linda had a new lead. She directed her team to comb through Theo's recent interactions, focusing on women in the entertainment industry who might have had a motive to bring him down. The breakthrough came later that evening. One of Linda's detectives uncovered a series of emails between Theo and a woman named Vanessa Reed, a former production assistant on one of his films. The emails started off cordial, but quickly turned confrontational. In one message, Vanessa accused Theo of assaulting her at an after-party and threatened to go public if he didn't confess. Linda tracked Vanessa down to a modest apartment in North Hollywood. When she knocked on the door, Vanessa answered cautiously, her eyes narrowing when she saw the badge. "I've already told my story to the press," Vanessa said flatly. "I don't have anything else to say." "I'm not here to talk about your story," Linda replied. "I'm here to talk about Theo Grayson." Vanessa's expression hardened. "What about him?" "He's missing," Linda said. "I think it's connected to the threats you've been receiving." For a moment, Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. "Theo's missing? Since when?" "Since the night he met with Victor Harris," Linda said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Vanessa's eyes widened in recognition. "Victor Harris? He's the guy Theo tried to hire to scare me off." "What do you mean?" Linda asked, leaning forward. Vanessa hesitated, then gestured for Linda to come inside. Over the next hour, she recounted her ordeal in detail. She claimed Theo had assaulted her at a party after a night of heavy drinking. When she confronted him weeks later, he laughed it off and accused her of trying to ruin his career. "I wasn't after money," Vanessa said. "I just wanted him to own up to what he did." But then, things got scary. Vanessa described how she started receiving anonymous threats, emails, and text messages warning her to stay silent. She also noticed a black SUV parked near her apartment on multiple occasions. I didn't have proof, but I knew Theo was behind it, Vanessa said. And now you're telling me he's missing. I didn't do anything to him, if that's what you're thinking. I don't think you did, Linda said, but I do think someone wanted to silence you, and maybe Theo as well. With Vanessa's testimony, Linda had enough to link Theo's disappearance to the accusations against him. But the connection to Victor Harris remained elusive. Why would a man like Harris get involved in a celebrity scandal? The answer came in the form of a late-night phone call from one of Linda's detectives. We traced the offshore payments, the detective said. Turns out they weren't just hush money. Theo was laundering money for Harris. The revelation blew the case wide open. Theo wasn't just a victim of extortion. He was deeply entangled in Harris' criminal empire. And now, it seemed, both men's secrets were starting to unravel. The revelation that Theo had been laundering money for Victor Harris was a bombshell, but it also raised more questions than answers. Detective Linda Morgan now had two competing theories. Was Theo silenced because he knew too much about Harris operations, or was his disappearance connected to the assault allegations and the threats against Vanessa Reed? The stakes were higher than ever. Linda knew she needed solid evidence to move forward. Her team doubled down on surveillance around Harris Mansion, while she worked to decipher the cryptic entries in Theo's notebook. The numbers and initials still seemed like a code, but one line kept drawing her attention, the last warning. As Linda stared at the notebook late into the night, her phone buzzed. It was a call from Officer Greg Chavez, who was part of the surveillance team stationed outside Harris Estate. "Detective, you're going to want to see this," Chavez said, his voice tense. Linda drove to the scene immediately. When she arrived, Chavez handed her a set of photographs taken just an hour earlier. They showed Harris meeting with a man in the driveway of his mansion. The man's face was partially obscured by a baseball cap, but Linda recognized him instantly. It was Rick Calloway, Theo's former manager. "What the hell is Rick doing there?" Linda muttered. "Looks like they've got some kind of deal going on," Chavez said. Rick handed over a briefcase, and Harris seemed happy. Linda's mind raced. Rick Calloway had been one of Theo's fiercest enemies, locked in a bitter legal battle over stolen funds. Was it possible Rick had orchestrated Theo's disappearance with Harris' help? The next morning, Linda brought Rick in for questioning. He swaggered into the interrogation room, oozing smug confidence. "You again," Rick said, smirking as he sat down. "I already told you, I don't know anything about Theo's disappearance." "Then why were you meeting with Victor Harris last night?" Linda shot back, sliding the surveillance photos across the table. Rick's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You were photographed handing Harris a briefcase," Linda pressed. "Care to explain what was inside?" Rick leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Look, Harris and I have business together. It's got nothing to do with Theo." "Business?" Linda repeated. "What kind of business?" Rick hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You really want to know? Fine. Theo got himself in deep with Harris. He owed him money, lots of it. When Theo couldn't pay, Harris came to me. He figured he'd have access to Theo's accounts since we used to work together." "And you helped him?" Linda asked, disgusted. Rick shrugged. "I didn't have a choice. You don't say no to Victor Harris." "Where's Theo?" Linda demanded, her voice rising. "I don't know," Rick said, his tone suddenly defensive. "Last I heard, Harris was trying to scare him into paying up. Maybe things went too far, but I swear, I had nothing to do with it." Linda stared at him, trying to gauge whether he was telling the truth. His nervous fidgeting suggested he was hiding something, but without hard evidence, she couldn't pin anything on him yet. Determined to keep the pressure on Harris, Linda's team obtained a warrant to search his mansion. When they arrived, Harris greeted them with his trademark smugness, leaning casually against the doorframe as if he had nothing to hide. "Search all you want," he said. "You won't find anything." The mansion was sprawling, with rooms that seemed designed to flaunt wealth rather than serve any practical purpose. But it was in the basement that Linda's team made their first major discovery, a hidden room accessed by a keypad lock. Inside, they found a collection of items that sent chills down Linda's spine. There were surveillance photos of Theo, Vanessa Reed, and even Linda herself. Maps marked with red excess, detailing locations across Los Angeles. And in the corner, a steel cabinet filled with cash and burner phones. But the most damning evidence was a blood-stained jacket, folded neatly on a shelf. Linda immediately recognized it. It belonged to Theo. "This is it," one of the officers whispered. "This is the smoking gun." Linda wasn't so sure. The evidence was incriminating, but Harris was smart. It was possible Head planted the jacket to throw them off the scent or frame someone else. As the search continued, Linda received an urgent call from the forensic team analyzing Theo's notebook. "Detective, we cracked the code," the analyst said. "The numbers correspond to offshore accounts linked to Harris' money laundering operation. But there's more. One of the entries refers to a warehouse in the industrial district." Linda's heart raced. Could the warehouse be where Theo was being held? Or worse, where his body had been dumped? Gathering a team, Linda headed straight for the address. The warehouse was a massive, decaying structure on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust as they breached the doors, weapons drawn. Inside, they found signs of recent activity, footprints in the dust, discarded cigarette butts, and an empty chair in the center of the room. Ropes lay on the floor, frayed as if someone had struggled against them. "Clear," an officer called out, but Linda's instincts told her they'd just missed their target. Then, in the silence, Linda spotted something glinting in the corner. It was Theo's watch, the one He'd been wearing the night he disappeared. "He was here," Linda said quietly, "but where is he now?" The search had come agonizingly close to finding Theo, but the case was far from over. Someone was still pulling the strings, and Linda knew she had to move fast before the trail went cold again. Linda couldn't shake the image of Theo's watch lying abandoned in the warehouse. It was a stark reminder that they were running out of time. The scene pointed to one clear conclusion. Theo had been held there recently, but someone had moved him, likely in a hurry. Back at the station, Linda and her team pieced together what they had so far. The offshore payments, Vanessa Reed's accusations, Victor Harris' criminal empire, and Rick Calloway's involvement painted a damning picture. But the one thing missing was Theo himself. As the hours ticked by, Linda received another call, this time from the forensic team processing the blood-stained jacket found in Harris Mansion. "Detective Morgan," the forensic analyst said, her tone grim. "The blood on the jacket is a match for Theo Grayson." The news hit Linda like a gut punch. Though Shed feared the worst, part of her had clung to the hope that Theo might still be alive. The discovery of his blood wasn't definitive proof of his death, but it was a step closer to confirming her fears. The next day, Linda received an unexpected tip. A man claiming to have information about Theo's disappearance contacted the station, asking to meet in person. The caller refused to give his name, but mentioned something that made Linda's pulse quicken. "Check the second warehouse, the one near the docks," he said before hanging up. The location wasn't listed in Theo's notebook or the files they had on Harris operations, but Linda knew she couldn't ignore it. She assembled a team and headed to the docks that night. The warehouse near the waterfront was eerily quiet, its towering walls illuminated only by the faint glow of moonlight. The team moved cautiously, weapons drawn, as they breached the main entrance. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of salt water. Crates were stacked high, forming a maze of shadows that made it difficult to see clearly. Linda's flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping over every corner. "Detective," one of the officers called out, his voice echoing. Linda rushed to the far side of the warehouse, where the officer was standing near a large metal crate. The padlock had been broken, and the door was slightly ajar. As they opened it fully, Linda's heart stopped. Inside, slumped against the wall of the crate, was Theo Grayson. He was alive, but barely. His face was pale, his clothes torn, and his wrists were raw from being bound. He looked up weakly as Linda knelt beside him, his lips trembling as he tried to speak. "Help," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "We've got you," Linda said, signaling for the paramedics who had been waiting outside. "You're safe now." Theo's eyes fluttered closed as the medics worked to stabilize him. Linda's relief was tempered by anger. Someone had put him through hell, and she was determined to make them pay. Theo was rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed he was dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from multiple bruises and lacerations. It was clear he had been held captive for weeks. When Theo finally regained enough strength to speak, Linda was at his bedside, ready to hear his story. They came after me," Theo said, his voice shaky. "Victor, he wanted me to keep laundering money for him. When I said no, he threatened me." "Who else was involved?" Linda asked gently. "Rick," Theo whispered. "Rick set me up. He told Victor I was trying to go to the police. But I wasn't. I just wanted out." Theo's story confirmed Linda's suspicions. Rick Calloway had betrayed Theo, feeding him to Victor Harris to save his own skin. "There was another man," Theo added, his voice growing fainter. "I don't know his name, but he worked for Victor. He said it ruined everything." Linda pressed for more details, but Theo was too weak to continue. She left the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to bring Victor Harris and Rick Calloway down once and for all. The next morning, Linda secured an arrest warrant for Rick. When officers arrived at his home, they found him packing a suitcase, clearly preparing to flee. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and kidnapping," Linda said as Rick was cuffed. Rick panicked, spilling information in a desperate attempt to cut a deal. "It was Harris," he shouted. "He gave the orders. I just did what he told me to do." With Rick in custody, Linda turned her attention to Harris. This time, there would be no warnings, no second chances. The raid on Harris Mansion was swift and decisive. Linda and her team stormed the property, finding Harris in his private office. He didn't resist, but maintained his arrogant demeanor even as he was handcuffed. "You think you've won, detective?" Harris sneered. "You have no idea how deep this goes." But Linda wasn't intimidated. "You're done, Harris," she said. "Theo's alive, and he's talking. We've got everything we need to put you away." As Harris and Rick faced charges, Theo began the slow process of rebuilding his life. The revelations about his involvement with Harris' criminal enterprise shocked the world, tarnishing his once gleaming reputation. But Theo was determined to make amends, publicly apologizing for his mistakes and cooperating with authorities to dismantle Harris' operation. For Linda, the case was a bittersweet victory. She had found Theo alive, but the investigation had exposed the darker side of Hollywood, a world where fame, power, and greed often came at a deadly cost. And as Harris' cryptic warning lingered in her mind, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows of this case ran deeper than anyone realized.